The example we look at is the example of the Star Wars film, the first Star Wars that was made in 1977, which follows a story arc. And in very basic terms, we meet Luke, the hero of the story, in stasis, which is the once upon a time period, which is typically boring, not much happens. So in stasis, Luke is frustrated. There is a trigger moment that sets Luke off on a journey. And in this case, he finds a droid in the desert, and the droid has a secret message hidden inside from Princess Leia asking Obi-Wan to help her. This trigger sets Luke off on a journey. The early stages of a journey can often seem like a dream, where you've got lots of new things happening, new allies, new friends helping you. There's also comes a stage where there is a nightmare phase in the journey, where the scale of the problem you've got becomes apparent, and a crisis point where you hit the lowest moment. In Luke's case, the crisis comes when his mentor Obi-Wan is killed. We also like the heroes in our stories to make a critical choice, and again, in Luke's case, his critical choice comes when he's attacking the Death Star and chooses to switch off his targeting computer and use the Force instead. As a result of that choice, we get the climax of the film, which is that Luke blows up the Death Star. And the resolution is that he's gone from being a boy to being a man. The resolution is he's no longer an ordinary person, he's a Jedi. What's interesting is the hero across this arc has to grow. But at the worst point, at the lowest point, he would actually have been better off staying where he was in the first place. That's what we mean by a roller coaster. There is also another end to stories, which is the tragic end. If you think about a case like Macbeth, the tragic end is the downfall of the hero of the story. So, let's look at how businesses can play out their stories on story arcs. And here are three. About unhappy with the performance of his brand new vacuum cleaner, he tried to find a better design. After 5,000 failed prototypes, he finally did it. And this is the story of James Dyson. Or, we started selling our smoothies at a music festival. We put up a big sign asking if we should give up our jobs to make smoothies with a yes and a no bin. At the end of the weekend, the yes bin was full, so we resigned the next day and got cracking. And that's the story behind Innocent. Born as a cheap car for the German masses, embroiled in controversy over slave labour, they created the iconic car and van of hippie America. Became the biggest selling car maker in the world, but lost 30 billion after cheating on emissions tests. And yes, this is Volkswagen. So you could say these businesses have played out their own story arc at different points. Dyson's trigger was the rubbish vacuum cleaner he bought. Innocent's critical choice was to give up their jobs. Volkswagen, maybe they've hit a tragic end, maybe they'll make a comeback. So businesses tell lots of different stories about themselves. Here are two examples of stories that one business has told at different stages in its lifespan. And I want you to look at the difference between the types of story. And let's talk about empathy. And by empathy we mean simply trying to feel what other people feel, which is really part of what it takes to be an actor and part of certainly what it takes to devise characters. So if you're thinking about creating a character for a drama, you are looking at what do they think and how do they feel, because that's what's going on inside them. And that then is expressed in what do they say and what do they do, how do they appear, how do they dress, how do they walk, who are they with, what do they do with people. So when you're devising a character, you may think from the inner and go to the outer, because what you're trying to do is make credible characters you can work with. So we then had a little exercise where we put two characters up on a stage and gave the audience the chance to work out what their inner motivations were, and then the actors had to act out in action and words to reflect those inner motivations. So we'd gone from creating credible characters you can work with, and then we'd given it a twist and said what businesses need to do is work the other way when they're observing a customer. So they can only look at what customers say and what they do and how they appear and who they're with. That's the data. What they're trying to get from that is to work out what the customers are thinking and how they're feeling, because these are credible insights you can work on. And when you have insights, you can come up with new products and new services to satisfy people's needs. But you have to know what they're thinking and what they're feeling before you can do that. Well, you have to have a pretty good guess, and an insight is a pretty good guess. Here's an example. Lego used to go along to toy fairs for children and would realise that adults were turning up and making these amazing sculptures out of Lego. And adults were turning up again and again and again, and really clearly, as adults, still enjoying Lego. And that led Lego to create the Lego Architect range, which is a multi-million-pound enterprise selling adult Lego. So we've talked about storytelling, we've talked about empathy. Let's talk about improv. And the great guide to improv is that it's about noticing more, using everything, and letting go of your preconceptions. And that's from a book called Do Improvise by Robert Poynton. Very, very good guide to improv. And he encourages you to try an experiment, which is play a game called Presents, where one person has to give another person an imaginary present, and they have to respond to what they think might be inside the present, and then give another one back, and then give another one back, and so on and so on. And because there are no explanations as what's inside the box, what's inside the present, it forces you to notice. So you have to notice what the other person is doing when they give you the present, use whatever you can, and let go of your preconceptions. So it's a great improv game called Presents. And we played that for a while, and it encourages you to be very playful. And what you realise when you spend time in businesses who are trying to be innovative is they are desperately trying to be playful, because they have a problem, and they take it, if they're going to crack the problem with a new solution, they take it in 3 stages. First of all, they open up the problem and try to look at it from as many different angles as they can. And then they spend some time exploring that problem and finding lots of different ways. And that's where they need to be playful. That's where they need the skills that come with improvisation. And only when they've had time to play around with the idea for a while do they then close down their options and say, right, this is what we think we'll try. But that is a classic model for innovation in industry. And the interesting thing is, if you can improvise on stage, you can do that middle bit very, very well. You can stay playful. Because the opposite is thinking under pressure, which a lot of people do a lot of the time, and it's not very creative. For example, if you ask someone to quickly write down one thing that's orange, the chances are they'd write down an orange, because it's obvious and they're under pressure. If you say, now take 60 seconds, write down as many things as you can that are orange, they'll go and they'll struggle after 4 or 5, but they'll keep going. If you add another 60 seconds, they really have to get creative. And then things start coming out like traffic cones and Oompa Loompas and fake tan and Donald Trump. And the really interesting things come out the longer you stick at it. And the more playful you get, the more interesting it gets. Very interestingly, in Pixar, the advice to their scriptwriters is this: discount your first idea and your second, third, fourth and fifth. Throw away your first 5 ideas, because that's how you get the obvious out of the way and surprise yourself. And again, in improvisation, it's very common to respond to an idea with yes and. Yes, and what else could we do? Which is, rather than saying, oh, that's a good idea, or no, that's not a very good idea, just say yes and. Or I say, when I'm facilitating, yes, what else? Either way, you're prompting people to keep coming up with more and more ideas. What you want in the playful stage of innovation, in the improv stage, is lots of options. You don't want the right idea yet. Because this is called divergent thinking. And it's basically looking for lots of possible options rather than trying to find the right answer straight away. So I show the students 2 divergent thinking tools I use all the time with business clients. The first is called brainwriting. And it's simply a grid where you start off by writing 3 ideas across the top of the page in response to a particular creative challenge. And then you pass your page on to someone else and they build on your ideas. They say, yes, and we could also do this. Or yes, and we could make this bigger. Yes, and we could make this wilder. And then you pass around again. And by the time you've done this 3 times, you've got 9 ideas in front of you, none of which are yours. And it's an incredibly divergent, incredibly creative technique that's used right across business when people know what they're doing. Another technique I showed them is called the lateral nudge. And this is simply a way of pushing people to be a bit more lateral in their thinking. And I use photographs when I do this. And I say, look at these random photographs. Imagine what these mean or could mean to you. And then when you've spent some time looking at the photographs, think, okay, how could any of the things I see in this photograph help me solve my creative challenge? Again, it's a question of noticing more, using everything and letting go of your preconceptions. And that is at the heart of the playful stage of innovation. So when people ask you, what are you going to do with a degree in performing arts? You can tell them, well, it's about storytelling, it's about empathy, it's about improvisation. And you can tell businesses that this is about persuasion, insight, and innovation. And these are really valuable business skills. If you like this kind of thing, you can follow me on Twitter, you can have a look on my website, and you'll find more of this kind of advice.